Tonight we start with a shocking story from County Durham that stretches back decades. More than 140 men have now come forward with allegations of sexual and physical abuse at a former youth detention centre near Consett. With exclusive television access to the police investigation, we ask how a prison that was meant to turn young offenders away from a life of crime with a short, sharp shock has instead left dozens of lives in ruin.
It's always in my head. The shame, it's ruined my life, completely ruined it.
Ray Poor was 17 when he was sent to Medomsley for stealing biscuits from a factory.
The chap that went there with me didn't answer with the title Sir, and he was shouted at and I laughed, and one of the officers just punched me full in the chest, really hard, and that was a wake-up call, a shock, and from then on it was pretty much an everyday thing. You were always prodded, punched, hit.
Arm shoulder height, lift, lift.
Demolished in the 1990s, this is the BBC's only footage of Medomsley. It was run on military lines and staffed mainly by ex-servicemen.
Right, come along, keep going. Let's smile, look as though you're enjoying it.
I've spoken to a very senior civil servant who said that within Home Office circles, it was known that the junior prison's reputation for being tough sometimes lapsed into brutality.
These will be no holiday camps, and I sincerely hope that those who attend them will not ever want to go back there.
It's very hard, very hard indeed. The physical education gets you super fit. You know, the discipline in general. You know, you have to do what you're told when you're told.
Medomsley's tough approach made it an ideal home for the then Conservative government's short, sharp shock experiment. And when Leon Britton, the Home Secretary, visited in 1985, he was pleased with what he saw.
I think we've got it about right, yes. I wanted to see for myself how it worked out in practice, and I think we have got it about right.
Despite the endorsement, Medomsley was closed at the end of the decade. Shielded for almost 20 years, in a regime where young inmates feared they'd be hit if they complained, was violent rapist Neville Husband. As a prison officer, he was in charge of the kitchens, where for 2 decades he preyed on dozens of boys.
He got hold of me and pulled me up, and he got hold of my throat and pushed his body against mine and squoze, and he was telling me that, you know, you will do it because you can just disappear. Nobody would care. No, you're just scum, you know. And I could feel myself losing consciousness, and the next thing I remember was him raping me. And I was walking by an officer who noticed I'd wet the bed, and he told me to get me bedclothes together, me soiled clothes, and made me bunny hop to the showers naked. And when I couldn't make it to the showers, I was kicked. We knew we couldn't turn around to them and complain to them about what had happened with Husband, because they were part of it. They were the ones that were kicking us about every day. The odd punch in the arm, in the ribs, the back of the knees. Every day they were doing it. Yeah, you had nobody to talk to.
Neville Husband and a storeman, Leslie Johnson, were finally convicted of their crimes in 2003. They were jailed for 10 years and have since died. During the investigation into Husband, officers who'd been at the jail gave evidence.
Medomsley was a very strict youth detention centre which operated a short, sharp shock treatment regime.
Most Borstalls and detention centres were run the same way for the past 20 years. They were very, very tough institutions.
But now, decades after the jail closed, and with more and more former inmates coming forward, the police have opened a new and wide-ranging investigation into what was really going on at Medomsley.
We have seen a huge amount of people come forward that have been physically assaulted. When they went to this place, they were just faced with what was effectively a brutal regime, and if you ended up in the kitchens in that brutal regime, you would almost certainly be raped and sexually assaulted. So my feelings and that of the team are dead straightforward. This is horrific.
70 detectives are working on the inquiry, with new cases still coming in.
He talks about the day that he went and he actually had his legs kicked from under him. He describes that when he was in there, it was like a concentration camp.
There's a regular briefing to share information with colleagues.
A prison officer came along and picked up the metal mop bucket and started hitting him around the head and around the body. He only stopped because he became tired.
This is some of the most shocking abuse I've ever heard of in terms of specific acts and the scale of it. It must have been a living hell.
He describes quite heart-wrenchingly how his parents would come in and visit him and see the marks and bruises to him. But he would pray, he would beg them not to say anything because he would just be subjected to more beatings inside.
Some of the boys would lay at the bottom of the stairs and ask another boy to jump off the stairs and jump onto their legs so they could break a leg, so they could be removed from Medomsley Detention Centre in order that they wouldn't be subjected to any more beatings.
The inquiry is expected to take many more months, but there are clear objectives for the officer in charge.
If people have committed criminal offences, they should be held to account for them, and most important, that those individuals that's come forward to police, that the place they find themselves in at the end of it is better.
Most of them have not told anyone about it, and they finally managed to, they've seen this and realised that they're not alone. A lot of them have said it's sort of like a hand grenade now, being thrown in their brain and blown their heads completely.
Today's approach is a far cry from the experience of Kevin Young. He was 17 when he was raped by husband and tried to report the crime as soon as he was released from jail almost 40 years ago.
All efforts were made by the police to make sure that I didn't make a complaint. In other words, I was threatened with rearrest and to be sent back to Medomsley. I couldn't begin to tell you how I felt that day. Do I feel that way today? Yeah, I do. I don't feel any difference. I feel betrayed. I feel let down. And I am angry.
Kevin says he was never offered any counselling or official apology for what happened to him.
The Home Office wanted to brush this under the carpet, wanted it to go away. They hoped that it would be an isolated issue involving a few men. It hasn't been. It's turned out to probably involve hundreds.
When I'd heard about what had happened, I thought, well, that's absolutely disgusting that was going on there. But it wasn't just the sexual side. There was a lot of widespread physical violence.
This man, who doesn't want to be identified, was 17 when he was sent to Medomsley.
You could take a punch or a push or a kick. They were telling you were worthless, that's why you were in there, you were no good, nobody wanted you.
He says the worst violence he suffered was from fellow inmates, but he alleges it was orchestrated by the prison staff.
I was in the dorm, I felt being kicked and punched and slapped, and when I tried to look up and I seen a prison officer at the doorway smiling, and then I realised he's put them up to this, and I just curled up into a ball and took what they threw at us and thought, well, tonight it's my turn, be somebody else's tomorrow.
There is a culture of violence that's far beyond any short, sharp shock. This is violence on a daily basis by wardens towards very, very vulnerable young men.
So how could this all have gone unreported? In the initial investigation into husband's sexual assaults, prison officers said it was an open secret that boys were being abused.
There are always very strong rumours that Neville husband was homosexual and he was sexually abusing the boys that worked for him in the kitchen.
As soon as I arrived, I was told by two officers that Neville husband was a domineering character, and also that he allegedly abused inmates.
On a night time, husband would usually keep one of the boys back with him after the others had been dismissed. We all felt sorry for that boy.
Tim Newell was the governor at Medomsley from 1978 to 1981, socialising with husband during his spell there. And he even took part in plays he produced. But reports written by the governor about husband could not have been more different from what was really going on.
Mr. Husband's influence on trainees is positive and they all benefit from the environment he creates.
I was in panic, complete panic. I thought he was going to kill me. He was talking to me, he was saying nobody will ever care. You know, if you went missing, you could be found hanged in your cell. You could just disappear.
Mr. Husband continues to provide an outstanding contribution to the running of the establishment.
I feel like I'm drowning every day. I feel like I'm doggy paddling. I feel like I've been crushed inside. I feel like any good that was in me has been shredded.
Mr. Newell declined to speak to us, but in a statement told us he wrote the glowing reports about Husband because he was
an outstanding catering officer,
but added that he didn't have a particularly close relationship with him. He said he was
very sad about the pain brought about by my staff,
and added,
if I had any suspicions about sexual abuse or abuse of any kind, I would have taken action.
And
if staff knew about the abuse taking place, I'm very concerned they let the abuse continue.
Sir Martin Neri was Director General of the Prison Service when Husband's crimes came to light. Had you heard about a reputation for Medomsley being tough?
Oh yes, I started my prison career at Dearbolt in Barnard Castle. We would get boys who'd been to Medomsley when they were younger, and they would talk about how tough Medomsley was. Do I now think that young people would have been knocked around at Medomsley? Yes, I do.
But is there something about the phrase short, sharp shock that sends a green light to officers to give people a bit of a kicking every now and again?
I'm very clear that the short, sharp shock regime probably encouraged the low-level physical abuse. In the philosophy, which goes pretty much close to saying, scare these kids straight, I think there's an implicit encouragement which certain individuals follow to abuse people.
At the end of the day, abuse went on for something like 20 years, so how is that possible? How do we explain that?
Well, I don't know. What, frankly, I find appalling is the suggestion, the evidence, that lots of other staff knew about that, didn't participate, but knew about it and didn't say anything. In my view, that's criminal.
Do you think those who are damaged by this actually deserve an official apology?
Without reservation, I apologise to people at Medomsley who were harmed by Neville Husband. We should have stopped him much earlier.
Now 143 former inmates have come forward. A decision on whether to press new abuse charges will be made later in the year. In the meantime, Ray has this message for staff who worked at Medomsley.
Come and tell the truth, just the truth. Regardless of what you've done wrong, just come forward and tell the truth.
If you'd like to get in touch with the police or would like to talk to someone, then we'll have details for you at the end of the programme. There's also more on my blog. Just go to bbc.co.uk/Chris Jackson. More than 140 men have now come forward with allegations of sexual and physical abuse at a former youth detention centre near Consett. With exclusive television access to the police investigation, we ask how a prison that was meant to turn young offenders away from a life of crime with a short, sharp shock has instead left dozens of lives in ruin.
It's always in my head. The shame. It's ruined my life. Completely ruined it.
Ray Poor was 17 when he was sent to Medomsley for stealing biscuits from a factory.
It was pretty much an everyday thing. You were always prodded, punched, hit.
Arm shoulder height. Lift. Lift.
Demolished in the 1990s, this is the BBC's only footage of Medomsley. It was run on military lines and staffed mainly by...
The chap that went there with me didn't answer with the title Sir, and he was shouted at and I laughed, and one of the officers just punched me full in the chest, really hard, and that was a wake-up call, a shock, and from then on
Tonight we start with a shocking story from County Durham that stretches back decades.